Hello. So we are still looking at sample exam. We are now looking at the last question. This is question E. Question A, B, C, and D were all about the same scenario. We were in Orange Beach, Alabama. There were some crimes, there were some victims of crimes, there were some people involved in the drug business, and so on. Now with question E, we kind of switch scenario, so you can forget about everything that we said in the previous question, and I'm giving you fresh new data through this table. So we have three racial or ethnic groups, A, B, C, and D, just call them very generically, and they are in prison. And the question is which one among people in race A, B, C, or D are you more likely to find in prison? And which one among people in race A, B, C, or D is more likely to end up in prison? So these are two different perspectives. And again, this question, as the hint says, is meant to make you think about the difference between the probability of A given B and the probability of B given A. And I hope this will become clear as we delve into the question. Okay, so here are the data. So we have race in the table. We have race, people of a race or ethnic group A, B, C, and D. Here are the number of prisoners for each race. So there are 5,000 for race A, 500,000 for race A, 700,000 for race B, 1.5 million for race C, and only 100,000 for race D. And so these are the number of people for each race in prison. And then this other column in the table tells us essentially how many people are there in the general population, not among prisoners but just in the general population of a country, let's say, for each race. So this tells us that for people, there are 25 million people of their ethnic group or race A. There are 200 million people of the ethnic group of race B. There are 70 million people of the ethnic group of race C. And there are 400,000, the ethnic group of race D. Okay, so now the question asks us two things to calculate how likely are people for each race, how likely or probable is it that they will end up in prison. And the other question is, how likely is it that you'll find them in prison? So this formulation might not be completely transparent in English. So I think it's important to state them using formulas so that we are clear. So one question is basically asking you, how likely is it that if you're a member of some race, let's say race A, you are in prison? And let's suppose that here we are considering a certain particular year, etc. So for race A, what we need to do is to look at the total number of people in race A, so that's 25 million people, and then see how many of those are in prison, and we are told that 500,000 are in prison. So that gives you a chance of, or a probability of 0.2% for someone in race A of ending up in prison. And the similar calculations can be done for people in every other race. So what we put in the denominator of all these ratios are the number of people in the general populations that belong to that race or ethnic group. So 200 million for race B, 70 million for race C, and 400,000 for race D. And then in the numerator, instead, we put the number of people for each race who are in prison. So 700,000 for B, 1.5 million for C, and 100,000 for D. And this gives us these various values. So 0.2%, 0.35%, 2%, and 25%. And these are just straightforward divisions that you make. I hope I did the division correctly, but you should check, double check always. Okay, so this answers the question, the first question, which one among people in race A, B, C, or D is more likely to end up in prison? So the question is, suppose that you are of a certain race, and given your race or ethnic group, how likely are you to end up in prison? And this question is answered just simply by counting how many of the people in your ethnic group are in prison. And assuming that there are no big differences in terms of the probability that one person or another in the same ethnic group goes to prison, although in fact there are big differences, but here we're simplifying, so we're assuming that everybody within a group is equally likely to end up in prison. And so what you should do here is simply count how many people in a certain ethnic group are in prison and divide by the total number of people in that ethnic group. And this gives us your various probabilities here. And so you see that if you are in ethnic group D, then you are more likely to be in prison, because your chance of being in prison, or probability of being in prison, is 25%. Now, the second question that item E asks is, which one among people in race A, B, C, or D are you more likely to find in prison? So that's a different question. Basically, this is the question of saying, well, suppose that you're walking into a prison. And so now you are inside the prison. So that's the condition that you are considering. You're inside in a prison, and you are asking yourself, how likely are you to find someone who is in race B, or someone who is in race C, or someone who is in race D, or someone who is in race C, etc. So this is a different type of question. It's no longer the probability of being in prison given that you are of a certain race, but it's the probability of being of a certain race given that you are in prison. So there is the flip side of the question. Now, how many people are in prison total? Well, we simply have to add up all the people in prison. So 500, 700,000, 1.5 million, and 100,000. So it gives us 2,800,000. This is the total people in prison. And then this is gonna go in the denominator, and the numerator will correspond to the people in for each race who are in prison. So 500,000 for A, 700,000 for B, 1.5 million for C, and 100,000 for D. And this is gonna give us the following probabilities. 17, 25%, 54 is 0.35%. So now, if you are in prison, which one among the four races is more, if you were to pick a person at random from a prisoner, how likely would it be that that person belongs to race A? It would be 17% probable. That the person belongs to race B would be 25% probable. That the person belongs to race C would be 54% probable, and that the person belongs to race D would be very, very improbable, 0.35%. So what is interesting here is that race C is the one that is most frequently encountered in prison. Almost half of the prisoner belong to race C. Actually, more than half, 54%. But instead, there are very, very few people of race D who are in prison. But interestingly, we saw before that if you belong to race D, then your probability of ending up in prison is very high. It's actually much higher than any other people in any other race. And so here again, it's important not to confuse the probability of being in prison given you being of a certain race, and the probability of being a certain race given that you are in prison. So these are two different notions.